Welcome to Pathways Through the Prairie, the North Dakota State Library podcast, where we interview North Dakota librarians, state government leaders, and interesting North Dakotans. Today, I'm joined by Zeineb Yousif, the Digital Initiatives Librarian and Interim Head of Discovery at the University of North Dakota. Zeineb has been with UND since 2016, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, so thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Zeineb, the State Library's vision is providing pathways to knowledge and opportunities. What was your pathway into libraries?
My pathway to libraries was kind of interesting. So I was what Michael Threets calls a library kid. Like, I loved libraries. I spent so much time there. The books and me, we were great friends. That was my fun thing once a week. But I wasn't, I didn't really initially think of like becoming a librarian as a career path. In my undergraduate, I studied political science and English, and I had been planning to go to law school and become a human rights lawyer. I was really interested in that specific area. And as I got towards the end of my degree, the feeling of practicality sank on me. And looking at how much law school cost and how many jobs there were in the specific area of human rights law, I sort of thought, I would have a heart attack every day if I had that much debt. I don't know if I could do that. And so I started thinking about what were other things that I could do. And I was at the library one day because, I was a library child that had grown into a library adult. And I thought, gosh, I love it here. I would love to work in a place like this. What would that be like? And then it like clicked for me that was a thing real people did, because I think somehow in my head, being a librarian was like being a princess, like, oh, real people don't do that. Obviously, everyone wants to do it, but it doesn't happen in real life. And so I looked up what it took to get into like a library and found out about the MLIS and library technician opportunities, all of that. And, applied to library school, learned a lot about basically every type of library role, because I was, again, plagued with practicality. And I was like, okay, I want to do this, but also I need a job so bad. So I got to make sure I've got experience in everything. I'm going to take a broad range of classes. I can't fit archives into my schedule. That's okay. I'm going to go do a practicum over here. And then I'll do this volunteer here. And that way I'll be employed at the end, God willing, which that did work out that way. So the specific area of librarianship I got into was also kind of a pivot, because I sort of went to library school thinking I really wanted to be a teen librarian. Because, I knew how much I'd enjoyed the library as like a teenager. And also, I love the youth. They're so much fun. I was like, yeah, I could do programming for them. I could like figure out manga collections, all of that stuff. But when I started my degree, I had sort of started learning about work happening around open access and like the idea of making sure that research was really broadly available to people. And I was like, oh, I'm so value aligned. Love that. That's what libraries are about. And eventually I had picked up a side job working for the Osgoode Hall Law School. They had a institutional repository, which is just a website for making like a university's research freely available to the public. That's kind of what I do now. And so once I'd been there for a while, I was like, okay, I see the vision. I could see myself continuing to do this. And then, several years later, I'm doing that on a larger scale. It's pretty great.
That's really cool. So what does a human rights attorney do?
So that's a really good question. And I'm digging back into, my thoughts at like 17 and 18 when I was thinking about it. Like just straight up in terms of being a human rights attorney, like you're probably going to be at the bar for human rights oriented cases. I had actually, once I realized how much law school cost, I was looking at my backups and my backups to my backup. And so library school was the first choice, but I was also looking at a master's in human rights law as a second option if I didn't get into library school, because if you don't, you do have to pass the bar exam in order to be a lawyer, but you don't have to do that to be an advisor. So if I could have like say gone that master's in human rights law, and like if someone was looking to consult in an area that I specialized in, I could be like, yeah, I'm going to look into the research and the precedent and all of that. I'm not going to be able to defend the case, but I was thinking that could be my like backup if like library school doesn't work out. And they're like, sure, we don't know you.
So how does working in a library tie in or, feed that desire to help people in the human rights piece of it?
And so for me, I think like that human rights piece was, I think, part of like this broader orientation I've always had towards service. Like I really wanted a job where I could feel like I was doing something good for the world, which that's not uncommon. I think most people would like to go to work and feel like they've done something worthwhile. And I was trying to think of stuff that my education had qualified me for. So with political science particularly, like I'd taken a really great class in international human rights law, which is sort of what started me looking at it.
Okay.
Other areas that I had looked at a little, and this is where the library connection comes in. So when I started thinking about like librarianship as a thing I could legitimately do, I found out that my local library ran and I might have the phrasing wrong, a library settlement services partnership. So they were helping new immigrants with like, just whole that process of like coming in and figuring out the agencies you work with and paperwork. And that really caught my eye because, so my background is Eritrean. I was born in Canada, but like a fair amount of my family had come over. And I feel like I'd done some of that informally, like I remembered going to the like immigration law office with my aunt and like sitting down with her and like going through that whole process. And so realizing that libraries did that level of like scope, like I feel like we get the library cliche at this point to be like, we're not just books, but like it wasn't just books. There was this really huge visible service element. I actually wrote my library school application basically about that. I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do libraries. Look what they do for the community.
That's awesome. Tell us a little bit for listeners who aren't in the library world. What does a digital initiatives librarian do, and what does it mean to be the interim head of discovery?
Okay, so we'll do the digital initiatives one first because I've done that one for 9 years. So I feel like I have my elevator pitch. So the primary thing I do as a digital initiatives librarian, and the thing that I was hired to start as a service at my institution, is run our institutional repository. And that is just basically a website where we are trying to make the work that UND does in terms of research free to the public. I'm in an academic library space, and academic work can often be really, really inaccessible to the public. If you're not affiliated with a university or someplace that pays for those materials, and you're like, I want to do some research today. I'm really curious about, I don't know, well-researched material on why frogs are red sometimes and what causes that coloration. And you find an article and it seems really relevant. And you're like, sweet. And then you click on it. And then you get hit with a paywall and they're like, oh yeah, you can have access to this article. Just pay like $50 and it'll be yours for like a month on the rental system. That's not great. We don't want that at all. So a huge portion of my role is advocacy among our faculty to be like, hey, we have this tool for making our stuff openly available. And I can help you navigate all of the weird copyright stuff around it, because often there's weird copyright stuff around it. And then the other, and sort of from like a knowledge creation point as well, there is research that happens here that doesn't go into formal publications. So like maybe, for example, the Department of Biology is having their students do a poster session about all the research they did for their capstone. And so these students go and they make these amazing posters and people come and see them for that display that's up for 2 hours. And then all that work disappears. Like no one sees it, right? They did it and it was awesome, but like you can't find it online in any capacity. And so part of my thing is like, I'll kind of show up and I'll be all like, hey, do y'all want to like preserve this digitally? This would be really great because that research gets out there. And for a student, it means you have something of a digital portfolio, right? Especially if you're planning to do more academic work or just anything in your field, you can be like, yeah, see an example of all the stuff that I learned and then conveyed to the public. So that's sort of like the big broad scope of my job. The other thing that I will help with, and the repository can be a tool for that, is sometimes I will get people who come in with kind of weird projects where they're like, I don't exactly know how I make this available, but I think it's useful. I think people should have access to it. So one of the earliest projects that I got along that lines was we had a faculty member in our English department, and she had written this book about settler narratives. So specifically, it was talking about settlers in, I want to say Australia, America, and Canada, but we're going to asterisk it. These are examples. And she talked about sort of, commonalities around like their experiences and themes that she saw there. But as part of her background work about it, which is what she was trying to figure out a way to share, is there are so many settler narratives that were people making stuff up. It was just like a fun story. And so she'd done a lot of research to be like, oh, I'm confirming this is actually somebody who did the thing versus like, someone who wrote this story about Tom Brown who went to Australia and like saw the rivers or whatever. And so she was like, that's like underlying research that will help anyone else who's trying to do that in this field to not have to redo that. How do I make that available? And so like what I worked with her was to create a repository collection that focused specifically on the stuff that she'd ID'd as being like, oh, these are legit, like a real person wrote this and this stuff is as reasonably true as someone writing about, their exciting experience in the 1800s can be. And then to do some of the identification work she'd done, because she'd been like categorizing like, oh, where was it that they went? Or is this like a woman or a man? Because maybe somebody's really interested in like female experiences in settling versus men. And so that was the kind of thing where it's like, this is useful, but like there wasn't like a natural home, right? Because she'd written the book and she couldn't really put like, here's the 60 documents that I like worked on and scanned and identified into the actual book.
Right.
But we could do that for her. That's
super cool.
Yeah, I really
And then how
it.
about Director of Discovery? What does that mean?
Okay, so our head of technical services, Shelby Harkin, retired a while ago. She was like an institution. That lady's forgotten more about cataloging than most people have ever learned.
Absolutely.
And after she had retired, we had temporarily had some of that role being covered by our associate dean, who also retired. So then we were sort of like, who do we have on hand to put some relation to these to kind of supervise that area of the department? And so our dean had asked me, like, probably be the head of, discovery services, where we had distinguished discovery as things like cataloging, metadata, stacks maintenance, anything that was very directly about how do people access our stuff, whether it's online or physically, as distinct from sort of our acquisition stuff, which went to another person who's temporarily covering it.
Okay.
So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I know you kind of like a whole bunch of library vocab there.
We use a lot of library-specific terms. So acquisitions is simply getting materials for the library.
Yes, the people who
and then discovery is helping you find the materials that we got, basically. Shelby, oh my gosh, she was at your institution, I believe, for over 50 years.
She was.
I think she came as a student and just stayed.
And never left.
Yeah, and so to say that she forgot more than most people ever learned is so true, because I know this dates me for people who've been in the library world. Like, I was one of the last classes to take cataloging where we actually worked with the physical card catalog, typed catalog cards. The period had to go in a very specific spot, and all these rules that there's a reason that I'm not a cataloger. And that's part of it is, those rules to keep straight. So do you find that being we'll focus mostly on the digital initiatives because that's your main gig. But even with the discovery piece, does that meet your desire for service?
Oh, it really does. Actually, one of the things I have enjoyed about my interim role is starting to figure out how to build tighter connections between the work that I do in digital initiatives and with our discovery work. Because I feel like the service piece for me around kind of digital initiatives work, open access, is about making sure that people have access to the information that they need, like that high quality information that academia is in the business of creating, but doesn't always, because of a variety of things about how publishing works. We don't need to go into my thoughts on academic publishing. That doesn't always make it to like patrons more broadly, patrons outside of the academic sphere. And so I feel like this work in discovery is just another way to do that. An item that doesn't have, say we've got a book and it's, I don't know, I guess I'm in a mood for frogs today. It's a really good book about red frogs, but, for whatever reason, that's not in the title. If that doesn't get captured, say, in the subject headings for it, someone searched, said this book is great about frogs, but they never would have known it because it doesn't come back in the catalog search and it's a physical item. So it's not like online where you have access to the whole text to look at it. So I feel like just all of this is about making sure that people can actually access that content that we create. And that's a service we do to at UND, our patrons here, but also just very broadly, right? The idea that we are technically like, we're not a public library, but we are a public library. Anybody can come in. We have guest cards, like you can use our stuff and we want you to use our stuff.
Mm-hmm. Do you have many public members that come in and use your collection, or is that mostly online?
So it's actually so great that you talked about that, because my dean's going to be so happy for me how I'm going to use this to pitch our community cards program. So right now, I would say maybe not like a huge amount of physical versus online, mostly because I see our reports for repository and we get great online usage. I'm really proud of that. But something that we have been doing in the past year is we had previously had a paid community card program. It is now entirely free. And we are trying to let people know that as broadly as possible. Like, if you want to access our collections, come get a community card. And we've got some really cool stuff. I think one of the ones a lot of people don't necessarily know about is we have a fairly robust children's and YA collection. And so that's the kind of thing that I feel like, hey, there's parents in the community who probably want to know that they could get like some fun books for their kids here. And maybe this is like slightly closer on their way. I think one of the things we have actually really focused our advocacy on is sort of making sure that like staff at UND knows that exists. Because I think people don't think about it in an academic library, but because we have a children's education program, it actually started as a learning collection for them, so that anyone can borrow from it. Mm-hmm. So our goal is that there's going to be more people coming into the library, but not a ton right now, but we definitely want to see them.
That's awesome. What do you think people would be surprised to learn that you have in your collection?
Oh, that's a good question. There's kind of like two ones. So I don't know if it's surprise. I just think it's fun and people didn't know it's there. Up in archives, we have got these like really tiny books. And I think this thing's going to be audio, so I don't know if people are going to see it, but picture me holding up my hand with like two fingers against one worth the size of a book.
Kind of a little bit bigger than a matchbook.
Yeah, a little bit bigger than a matchbook. And gosh, our archivist told me about this years ago when he explained what it was and why they printed that way. And it's gone. I mostly remember because I just thought, oh, these books are so cute. And then I took a photo and put it on Instagram, like, Chester Fritz Library, home of the cutest tiny books. And then I think the other one that I feel like people might be surprised and is actually kind of, I think, connected to the State Library. A couple of years ago, we had gotten some grant money to create a Library of Things grant. Yes. And we have expanded that collection. We brand it now as our Tech and Tools Library. And it's really broadly both technology in the, here's a camera type sense, but also like creative technologies or the kind of things that somebody might want to try out once, but they don't know if they want to put a whole lot of money in it. So they're going to borrow from the library. The toolbox when you move in and you have your IKEA furniture to assemble. So the one that I think is fun and that I kind of advocated for us buying is we've got a ukulele. You can come in and borrow a ukulele from the Chester Fritz Library if you've always wanted to know what it would be like to learn to play one of those.
Oh, for fun. Does that go out a lot?
I want to know. I feel like I did see the stats at some point. I got to pull it up again because I hope it does. I know it's circulated at least some because I remember looking at them and being all like, I was right, guys. Aren't you glad I said we should buy a ukulele?
Oh, I love that. That's super fun. I have a friend, I'm from the Chicagoland area, and I have a friend who teaches music in a school, and she was looking for ukuleles for her class a few years ago, and so we made a donation. My dad was a musician, and so we made a donation in Dad's name. He did not play the ukulele. He played the accordion. And the accordion vox, which most people have never heard of, it's basically an accordion with amplifiers. And but it was kind of fun to, just kind of memorialize Dad that way. I think ukuleles are so fun and they have such a unique sound. So I think that's really fun that you have that. And how brilliant to have a tool set. Like, how many kids come to school and have to put together whatever they bought for their dorm room, and then how do I do that? Or I have to put a shelf on my wall. What am I going to do?
So we did one of our earlier outreach programs was we did this thing we called pop-up libraries, where we'd be like, oh, do you have like an event where you want a library presence, or you like, an RA and you're like, oh yeah, I feel like this sounds cool. We'll come to your dorm with like some stuff. Either we'll pick the stuff, or if you have specific stuff, you tell us, I will kind of tell you about it. And like, whenever we were promoting like kind of tech and tools, the toolbox was a big one because it was so easy to like immediately be like, this is why this is useful for you, students. And then we had a few that were like, I think a little more odd, but it were fun. We had this Halloween mold, like it's shaped like a jack-o'-lantern. And I don't know if it's sort of intended like from creation to be maybe for cakes or whatever, but I don't know where we got this idea, but we have mostly been like, and then if you wanted to like do Halloween mashed potatoes, you could put them into the mold and you would have like a jack-o'-lantern mashed potatoes. You should borrow that for your next party.
Oh my gosh, I love that because okay, first off, I'm like, ooh, what fun cake pans do I have that I can mold mashed potatoes with? But I think college kids would really enjoy that. And it's quirky enough that you're going to get their attention. That's really fun. What are some exciting areas of growth for your library or for your area of your library?
Ooh, I feel like it's interesting because I think it jumps off the example I gave you. So something our library has been doing over the past few years is a very concerted effort around outreach. And so that's been in areas of like student outreach, faculty, community as well. And I can speak to it pretty well because I was actually part of our student outreach time for a while. I still help out, but when they asked me to do this intro, I was like, I will have to do less of something. And I think it will probably have to be that. So we have just super expanded kind of our social programming, the stuff that gets people into the building and talk to people and being like, this is fun. So I can give a few examples of them. There's one that we started about a year and a half ago called Tiny Donut Thursday. And it's the third Thursday of each month. And you can come to the Chester Fritz Library and one of us with our smiling faces will be giving you a free tiny donut. And we also use it as a way to cross-promote our other stuff. So when it first started, I think we had used it at least once for tech and tools where we're like, hey, do you want a donut? Yeah, all right, sweet. And now while you're my captive audience, trapped because the politeness of taking a donut from me means you have to listen for 2 seconds, I can tell you about this great collection that we have. We've been doing these monthly movie nights where we sort of have like a little bit of our home theater set up on our 4th floor. We have board game nights twice a month. And this one that one of my colleagues, Rebecca Brown, came up with, which I think has been going pretty well, what we're calling a crafternoon. So like we'll have like some craft supplies and people are just like, I don't know what that is and I don't have stuff, but 2 hours out of class and they can make a bracelet or whatever we've got, but they can also opportunity for them to bring in their craft project and just kind of talk with other people. And I feel like we've really seen that impact on like students in terms of being able to socialize in a way that isn't attached to anything else. Sometimes you get to college and it's a little lonely, right? You're like, oh, I'm off home and I don't really know anybody here and I don't know how to start those conversations. And that's easier to do over like something fun like that. And I feel like we have really, really seen the impact of it because we track our numbers, right? In terms of like perspectives from the building, and they've gone up significantly. And just anecdotally, like I hear from students who are just like, oh yeah, the library, there's always something cool going on there. And I'm like, the reputation I want us to have. Yeah, there is. Come by. So I think that's just an area we've really grown.
That's really cool. And I think no matter what kind of library you are, you could take a page out of that book, so to speak, and be like, oh, maybe this is something I can try to get people into the library because it's, crafternoon or whatever. That's awesome. What would you like listeners to know about your library that you haven't already shared?
Well, that's a good question. What would I like people to know about the Chester Fritz Library that we haven't shared? Gosh, there's so much. Let me explain. No, let me sum up. Okay, I think, and maybe I don't want to say I feel like I said a little bit, but I want to emphasize it. I think I really want people to know that the Chester Fritz Library is not just for UND. It is a public library. It receives public funds, and that I think everybody deserves access to that research, to those social things, and we would just love to have people come by, whether it's there or whether it's online and they're, having access to the stuff they had a question about.
I love that. And I think many of our publicly funded academic libraries across the state have that same attitude. So that's super cool. I usually end the podcast asking for a book recommendation. I never ask a librarian what their favorite book is because I know I always respond with just one. But what is a book that you've read that you really enjoyed and you love to share with people?
I do love to share with people, and I'm going to. So here's the thing. I read this book in 2023, and it was like that was my best book this year. And then, because when I like something, I tell everyone in the world about it, I just started hand-selling it all over. So it actually circulates really well out of our popular reading collection. So the book is Shubaik Lubaik by Dina Muhammad. It is a graphic novel, and it is set in an alternate version of Earth where wishes are basically natural resources. Like you can mine them, you can get them as different levels of quality. You know, if you get like a really high grade wish, you can change the world versus maybe like, a really low grade one where you're like, okay, well, I wish that I make it to work on time. I can see I'm going to be 20 minutes late if a miracle doesn't happen. And What I really enjoyed about it is two things. I thought the characters were just so vivid and interesting. I was invested in all of them. The frame format for the story is that there is a guy, a street seller, who has gotten his hands on 3 just super high quality wishes and what happens to the 3 people who get them from him. And so I really loved spending time with each of those 3 characters. And then I think the other thing that struck me and really impressed me is I felt like she had such a sociological frame of mind. Like she really thought through the implications of what it would mean for like wishes to be a resource, for it to be something that could find, how that might map onto existing patterns of the world around like what resource extraction looks like in some countries versus others. It was so good. Everybody should read it. You all will like it. And we have a copy of the Chester Fritz Library, so if you're here, come borrow it.
That's great. And if you're not near Chester Fritz, come to the State Library and borrow it from Chester Fritz through the State Library because we're all interconnected. Libraries love to share our resources. I have learned so much today, Zeineb, about you and your story and about your library and all the amazing things happening at Chester Fritz. I knew about the Library of Things. And again, for our listeners that might not be in the library world, library things are just simply things that we circulate that aren't what you would expect in a library. So it might be puzzles, it might be tools, it might be a Instapot, as one of our libraries circulate. And I knew about that because it was a State Library grant that started the collection, and you have definitely grown it since then. And I had heard about Tiny Donut Thursday, which I just absolutely love that idea as well. And it's college students and they always need to eat. So that's just brilliant. But I really learned a lot about your digital collection and your digital initiatives as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to continued future conversations here on the podcast. Thank you everyone for listening in.
Thank you all for inviting me. This was fantastic.